The sources in Gemara that he did exist, as we see, are highly debatable which Yeshu it is. Rabbeinu Yechiel Meparis completely dismisses it. The Rambam in Igeres Teiman says did exist. The Ramban puts him at the era of Yeshua ben Prach. That there was a Yeshu who existed is not a question. That the Gemara calls him on Noitzri, that he came from Nazareth, is not a question. That the Gemara says that this man Yeshu was involved in Kishuf and Heisus Eidiach is not a question. That he was killed by Bezdin according to the Gemara is clear. But who that is and when he lived, that's very difficult to know. And therefore some say that maybe the Jesus of Christianity never existed, or existed at another time, or had a different type of life story. And this is debated ad hayoim hazeh, and it's certainly not my role or expertise at all to weigh in on that subject. But there's no question that many, even objective authorities will speculate that perhaps he did exist, although it may be completely disconnected with the Yeshu that the Gemara discusses. Rabbeinu Yechiel Meparis argued that the story with Tzoyer Tachas is a different Yeshu. It's the Yeshu of the Gemara, Yeshua ben Prachia's Yeshu, and therefore it's not an insult to the Christian deity, as discussed earlier, Rabbeinu Yechiel Meparis. Perhaps the greatest, most revolutionary Chiddush novelty came from a very surprising source, Rabbi Yaakov Emden. Rabbi Yaakov Emden was born in 1698. The same year like the Baal Shem Tov, actually, in Germany. And Rabbi Yaakov Emden, who was a prolific writer, author, scholar, is well known for the fact that he was the greatest zealot of his generation against any vestige containing containing the sect that followed the false Mashiach Shapsi Tzvi. And you may know that till today in Turkey there's still a little sect that follows Shapsi Tzvi, the Shapsayim. But in the century after, there were still Jews who followed him. And Rabbi Yaakov Emden made it his mission statement to uncover them and remove the disguise. And that's why I say it's so surprising that Rabbi Yaakov Emden, who has a commentary on Megillas Tainis, on Seder Olam Rabbah Zutta, which discusses Jewish history, makes a unique and quite surprising comment about Yoshka and about Christianity. What Rabbi Yaakov Emden says, when somebody reads the Gospels, one sees that Yoshka, so to speak, preached to his students that I did not come to nullify any mitzvahs. And I did not come to change anything in the Torah. So Rabbi Yaakov Emden, he tells his students, Yeshu tells his students, I did not come to change anything from the Torah. So the Rambam, who knew about this, obviously, he writes clearly in Igeres Teiman that Yeshu came to nullify Torah and mitzvahs. He said, I didn't. But the Rambam is aware of the inherent, numerous contradictions within the Gospels, within what they call the New Testament, and therefore the Rambam's position was, he declared himself Mashiach, he declared himself a prophet, he said that God revealed himself the truth of the Torah, and ultimately the objective was to change halacha, to change the Torah, which is what Christianity did, obviously. Rabbi Yaakov Emden proposes a very different idea. Rabbi Yaakov Emden says, and these are Mamish's words I translate, he says, to the Jews, he came and he told them, don't change anything of Torah. I don't want to change anything of Torah. You have to keep the Torah, you're Jews. All the statements where he changes Torah and he focuses on different ideas, he says because he came with a second mission to the Gentiles. And his mission to them was, Sheva mitzvahs b'nei Noach. You keep the Sheva mitzvahs b'nei Noach, and he said he was successful. He uprooted pagan idolatry and pagan immorality from the Gentile culture, and he says, look at the positive revolution he created. For the Jews, he said, don't touch Torah. For the Gentile world, he took them away from barbaric paganism, and he made them embrace the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nei Noach, which are the basic moral codes known as the 7 Noachide laws that God gave the Adam and the B'nei Noach for all of humanity. And in that sense, Rabbi Yaakov Emden has this great praise for this individual, who he says came with a very noble mission to tell the Jews to strengthen Torah and to tell the Gentiles that their role is to observe the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach, believe in God, respect God, follow God, not curse God, not steal, not kill, as this system of the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach, which is obviously a very fascinating theory or idea of Reb Yaakov Emden. Now, some of you, it's not popular today, some of you have, as children maybe, still remember a book called Toldos Yeshu, or Toldos Oisei Ha'ish, that Jews used to read on the night of Nittel. The night of Nittel, and in many communities they don't learn Torah, which is a whole separate issue, how that happened, why that happened, what's the reason, what's the legitimacy for it, what's the source of it. So they would often read that book. And that book has a whole story about him, which became very well known in Jewish pop culture. You know, his mother was Miriam, and she had another relation, and he was a mamza, and his father was Yosef or Yochanan, and he went to the Beis Hamikdash, and he got Kishif. He learned Kishif, and he was flying with the Shem HaMefarish, and then they got him down, and ultimately they killed him. All these stories. What's the source of all these stories? Rabbi Yehuda David Eisenstein says he doesn't believe there's historical valid sources for it. It was developed in the 1000s or the 11th century, especially when all the debates with the Christians happened, and some Jew created this book to give a Jewish version for Jews about the history of Yashka. When Mashiach comes, we speak about, we'll soon see the Rambam, we'll finish with the Rambam, how the world will be transformed where everybody will worship one God. So what does it mean? It means that every Zen Buddhist is going to come to shul. You want Zen Buddhists to start eating Yerushalmi Kugel Shabbos afternoon? You really want every Christian Gentile to start doing jalapeno herring after Musaf and listen to sermons of rabbis all over the world? I mean, from just that themselves they can perish. That's Mashiach? This is really what we want to introduce to the world? The pshat is this. Almost every philosophy and religion in the world has sparks of authenticity, sparks of Torah. For example, in Christianity, there's so much based on Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach and Amunah. However, those sparks are coupled with a lot of other things that are nonsense or rubbish or sometimes destructive. What happens in the world of Tikkun is the sparks of each religion and philosophy that come from Torah, that come from truth, will be liberated from the husks, and therefore every religion will find their kinship with Judaism, because they will realize those sparks of holiness that are part of them, that are really a reflection of Yiddishkeit and Torah, and therefore there will automatically be a unified, holistic world worshipping one true God. And then the Vilna Gaon quotes the Rav Kook quotes a teaching from the Vilna Gaon, which is an absolutely incredible teaching. The Vilna Gaon quotes the pasuk that we read in the Haftarah Vayetze. Says the Navi Malachi, Va'oyev haloi och Esav liYaakov. Esav is a brother to Yaakov. They're brothers. Va'oyev es Yaakov. What are the next words? Ve'es Esav sanesi. I loved Yaakov, and Esav I despised, I loathed, I hated. What does this mean? Ve'es Esav sanesi. Yitzchak loved Esav. Yitzchak wanted to bless him over Yaakov. Rivka changed the plan. What does it mean, Ves Esav Sanes? So some like to say what the Radak says. The Radak says, Vayar Hashem ki snua Leah. Yaakov hated Leah. Hated Leah. He hated his wife. So what does the Radak say? Doesn't mean he hated Leah. It means whenever you love two people, but one person you love more than the other, the second person perceives themselves as hated. If you have two children, you love them both, but one of the children you love more than another child, remember that that child is not going to see themselves as loved. They're going to see themselves as hated. So snua means relative to the intense love of the first one. Comes the Vilna Gaon and says, I don't understand. Why does it say S? Va'oyev es Yaakov. Ve'es Esav sanesi. Ve'es Ve'esav sanesi. Zak the Vilna Gaon, what does the word Es mean? What does the Gemara say? What does Es mean? Es means Es psarai. V'rachatz Es psarai. What does the Gemara say? Es hatafel psarai. Doesn't say v'rachat psari b'mayim. Wash your flesh in water. Wash es. What's es? That which is tafel psara. Your hair, your nails, that which is subservient to your body, which is secondary to your body, which could be removed from your body. That's what has to go to the mikveh. And that's es. Bereshis es hashemayim v'esaretz. What does Chazal say? What's es? Es hashemayim l'rabbis sva'ayim, es haaretz l'rabbis sva'ah. All the legions of heaven and earth. Kabed es avichel l'rabbis. The Gemara says, the famous Gemara, right in Pesachim, Shimon Suni hayadoirish, called es in Shebetoira, till he came to es Hashem alakechatira, Piresh. Who are you supposed to fear together with God? Achabar Rabbi Akiva. Akiva says, es Hashem alakechatira l'rabbis talmidei chacham. So you know what the Kotzker says. Rabbi Akiva said, l'rabbis talmidei chacham, even talmidei chacham have to fear God. What was the problem of Shimon HaMsoni? Who were you supposed to fear together with Hashem? Achabar Rabbi Akiva. Says the Vilna Gaon, Ve'es Esav Sanesi. You know which part of Esav I hate? The Es of Esav. I despise the things was haben sich zugeklebt. All those components that attach themselves to Esav, but they don't constitute the core, the essence, the root of Esav. And that's why we know in the Gemara in Saita what happened by Yaakov's funeral. Esav was killed by Chushim, right? And what happened to Esav's head? It rolled into whose grave? Yitzchak's grave. It says in Targum Yonason, they should the Esav be it for the Yitzchak. The head of Esav is buried in the bosom of Yitzchak. Ask the Chachmei Achsidus. The halach is you don't bury a tzaddik near a rasha. How can Yitzchak Ada Yom Hazeh be buried near Esav? Pshat is Reisha de Esav. There's the head of Esav, there's the body of Esav. The head of Esav represents who Esav is in his source, in his potential, in his calling, in his neshama. The tragedy of Esav is that there was a disconnect, a dissonance between the head of Esav and the manifestation of Esav. What Yitzchak saw in Esav was a tremendous soul, even greater than Yaakov. The Baal HaTanya writes in Torah that Esav comes from Tohu and Yaakov comes from Tikkun, and Tohu is higher than Tikkun. The problem of Tohu is that it went through a breaking of the vessel, Shviras HaKelim, and therefore Esav fell down very low. Nobody understood Esav because Esav in his manifestation in this world was aggressive, was immoral, was dysfunctional, was destructive. But Esav in his core was really fragile, sensitive, powerful, intense, holy, sacred. That's the tragedy of Esav. There was a disconnect. The spark fell down. The es Esav Sanesi. The sin is to the es of Esav. But when you go back to the core, to the nitzutz, to the source, says the Vilna Gaon, there Esav is together with Yitzchak. He's one with Yitzchak. And that's essentially the nitzutz of Esav, which according to the Arizal, Rav Kook doesn't mention this. I don't know if he saw that through Eitz Chaim, but according to the Arizal, Esav, this is Yeshua Noisri, and the Baal Shem Tov says there was a tremendous spark, and Tzaddik says there was a tremendous spark, but it went through a tremendous nefila, which is similar to the nefila of Esav, who becomes Esav Harasha, even though Yitzchak wanted to sublimate. You probably know the word of the Chidush Sharim. You know the Chidush Sharim? Moiridik. The Chidush Sharim writes in Parshas told us. This itself is a shir. Why did Rivka have to fool her husband? Why couldn't Rivka go into Yitzchak and say to Yitzchak, you mean well, but Esav doesn't deserve the blessings. Give them to Yaakov. Why do you have to deceive your husband? Says the Chidush Harim, if Rivka would have done that, you know what would have happened? Yitzchak would say, Rivka, you're right. Bring Yaakov in. So what would Yaakov do? I'm going to use my own words. Yaakov would go to the mikveh. He would daven, he would learn, he would put on his kapota, his bekesha, his shtreimel, his gartel. He would say L'Shem Yichud. He would do his boidedus, and then he would go into Yitzchak for the bracha. He would come in, Ahele Kiyid, and he would get the brachas. But Rivka was a Yiddish mama. And Rivka had to decide one thing at that moment. Who is going to get the brachas of Yitzchak? Is it only going to be the Jew who looks like the Jew? Or is it also going to include the Jew who doesn't look like the Jew? By having Yaakov dress up like Esav and get the brachas, Rivka guaranteed that for the next few thousand years, even those Jews who dress like Esav, look like Esav, speak like Esav, project themselves like Esav, disguise themselves as Esav, want to be like Esav, because they feel that is how they will be accepted in the world. Even those Jews are included in the eternal covenant of V'yitin L'cha Elokim Mital Hashamayim Mishmanei Aretz, as the Medrash says, Mital Hashamayim Zu Mikra Mishmanei Aretz Zu Mishnah Dagan Zu Braisa Tider Zu Gemara. The whole body of Mital Hashamayim Mishmanei Aretz, heaven and earth, was given even to the Jew who looks like Esav, but internally he or she is really Yaakov. Chedush Yorim Parshas told us. Because even Esav himself on a deeper level has this dissonance, has this tragedy. Ve'es Esav sanesi. What I despise about Esav is the tuffle, and it's true in every person. In every person we have elements of Esav, but you have to be able to distinguish between the S and between the essence. You can't confuse the S and the essence. You can't look in the mirror and see Esav and say, that's it. I'm Esav, I'm done, I'm the worst of the worst. You got to hate your S, but don't confuse your S with your core, with your essence.